faceoff. Shoots it, deflected, right in. Pietrangelo save, rebound. Stastny stopped by Pietrangelo. I don't believe that save. Neither does Peter Stastny. He can't believe the save that Pietrangelo just made on him as Frankie Sparkly. Now that maneuver there to stop and rob Peter Stastny. He should get 5 to 10 for that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Tendy Talk. I am your host Joe, better known as Washed Up Goalie on social media. You may have noticed some subtle changes to the podcast last week, like the fact that there was no ad for Anchor. That's because I'm excited to announce I'm teaming up with the Beer League Players Association to add Tendy Talk to their podcast network. The BLPA is building a network of podcasts so a new episode can drop each day of the week. Tendy Talk is staking its claim to Tuesdays for now. So what does that mean for Tendy Talk? For you, the listener, absolutely nothing. Other than the fact that you might see the BLPA logo in the bottom corner of the podcast art. For me, it means I upload my episodes to a different spot each week instead of Anchor. Nothing big. For washedupgoalie.com though, we'll be migrating all of the content from that site over to the beerleagueinc.com website. Don't worry though, if you type washedupgoalie.com into your browser or have it bookmarked, we'll be adding a redirect to the Washed Up Goalie /Tendy Talk content on the Beer League Inc. site. So it'll be easy to find, nice and organized so that it'll be a better experience. This is a win-win situation for both parties, as the BLPA not only adds a podcast to their network in their quest to have one launch each day of the week, but they also add some goaltending content to the lineup as well. For me, it exposes my content to a larger audience, which will hopefully lead to more views of the content and listeners to the podcast. The folks over at the BLPA are giving me free rein to operate as I have been, so really nothing's going to change in the big scheme of things. So now to this week's episode, and what an episode it was. This week I had a chat with Don Straus, the creator of the Armadilla goalie mask and painter of all those masks. Mask worn by Steve Shields and his iconic open mouth shark in San Jose, previous Tendy Talk guest Kelly Hrudy and his Hollywood mask, and most notably John Vanbiesbrouck. He wore the Armadilla, started in New York, but probably made it famous with his Florida Panthers mask, and he had some other great ones from Team USA, the New York Islanders, and who else did he play for? The Philadelphia Flyers. That was another great one. So without further ado, enjoy the episode with Don. Don, thank you for joining me. It's really a treat to have you on the podcast as somebody who grew up and not only seeing but admiring your work in the NHL for many years.
Oh, thank you very much. It's glad you take the time, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm grateful to Matt from Vintage Goalie as well, who connected us and told you that, if I reach out, you should respond to him. So I appreciate his brokering this meeting. And before we get too deep into things, I got to share the story of in high school, I took an art class because I was somewhat artistic. My grandfather was a graphic designer before the day and age of computers, so everything was by hand. So I got a little bit of an artistic bug, nothing like yourself. And every single project I did that year in art class, I did a goalie mask of some sort. And I had the discussion with my teacher. She's like, does everything have to be a goalie mask? I said, yes, it does. And she goes, but why? I said, look at them. They're true works of art. And finally, I got her to come around to my understanding.
Congratulations, yeah.
The very first one I drew was the John Vanbiesbrouck Panther helmet, the forehead. And she was like, that's really cool, but why?
No, that's flattering. Thank you so much.
Yes. So I don't know if you've had a chance to, listen to any of the previous podcast episodes, but the idea behind it is to talk to other goalies and people connected with goaltending to learn a little bit about them, both within the sport and away from the sport. So I think the discussion with you is going to be really interesting because you weren't a goalie and so much of your life has been outside of the sport and something completely different.
Yes, it has been an odd, you say, not so much an odd fit, but an odd convergence. Certainly different interests and abilities and technologies that all seem to cross roads, and for not having any history in the game and any real connection to it, it's still kind of bordering on unnerving how deep I've fallen into it. So
Yeah, so for those that don't know, you're growing up, your dad is a Canadian motorsports Hall of Famer in drag racing.
that's right. Yes.
So that's where your background really lies, is in the auto racing industry, which makes me wonder how a guy like Eddie Belfour never became one of your clients, because he's such a big, at the time, was a big racing fan. He had his favorite car on the back plate of his helmet for many years. And then you have a guy like the recently retired Corey Crawford, who's a bit of a gearhead, and a guy like Mike McKenna and Craig Anderson. It just seemed like these are guys that I would think would have just naturally gravitated towards somebody like yourself.
Yeah, certainly it was, I think, some different eras involved. Certainly, I was in the game when Ed was playing.
Yep.
And it's a much bigger pond than most people give it credit for. For the better part of 15 years that I was involved with it, I would say 60% at least of the guys playing, I never had a chance to meet with. Just with travel schedules and what I did was well beyond just, I hate the word just, but only dealing with pro stuff. Excuse me, the masks that I built were the first ones through with CSA approval on them. Yep. And opened up a really big door for the retail market. And I had kids as young as 9 years old wearing the product, right through to the NHL guys.
Yeah.
And being predominantly a one-guy show, that's probably what wore all my hair off, and I had to wear many, many hats. Everything from the production to all the design, the paint work, fielding the phone calls, the orders, the service, getting out on the road to meet with goalies passing through town. Was fortunate that where I live, or where the shop is, or where the shop was almost right in the middle of, I had access to Toronto, being an hour or so away from where I'm at. Buffalo was a couple hours, and Detroit was 3. So I, within driving distance, I had a few arenas to choose from, but it was just really challenging to schedule and to meet with the guys. And understanding too, this was all before the internet.
Yes. So
there wasn't the option for emails or any social media. It was all word of mouth, picking up the phone, calling, just the old-fashioned networking stuff. And I think my job would have been a lot easier today with, as you mentioned, our technology that we struggled with earlier in the show. It still would have made it much easier to try to coordinate and get the word out there to people.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So I want to back up a little bit for folks. That background in auto racing, you didn't grow up playing hockey. You grew up at the racetrack, following dad around. I would assume a lot of times going around the U.S., because if I read right on your website, he was one of maybe 2 or 3 Canadians in the sport at the time. So you spent a lot of time probably south of the border as a kid.
A fair bit, yes. And there were, again, the good news was that there were 3. I guess as Pop moved along through his career from being predominantly active in the local tracks, and there was a few in our area to choose from. It was probably at least three nights a week And I think back at probably not a whole lot different than somebody playing travel hockey, where we would be Wednesday nights at such and such a track and
Yep.
Fridays here and Sundays at the other spot. So a lot of traveling in this neck of the woods. And then as the larger national events came along, it would require a lot of travel to the US. They were in Quebec a fair bit.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there was a lot of miles spent getting to the different spots. And as he progressed up through the ranks, it was a lot more US based than what it was in our neighborhood stuff. That's for certain.
And I'm gonna guess it's, some of those hours on the road and sitting around the pits that's when you were picking up the pen and pencil and just honing that craft of art. Is that a pretty accurate assumption?
It's yeah, literally you were sitting over my shoulder, just peeking, I guess, for something going on. But yeah, there were many, and I guess this would have started when I was, oh gosh, uh, give it 7, 8 years old, I guess, is when these wheels started turning.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there was limited resources for young kids to deal with at some of these places. And yeah, it was a family event, but my mother, my sister, myself, we were all traveling with my dad for the events.
Mm-hmm.
But there were, yeah, a lot of down hours when I really wasn't involved in any of the mechanical process or between round servicing on the vehicles. Yeah, I had my trusty pencils and doodle pads, I guess, to keep me busy. And it was certainly art was the original gift, or the drawing was the original gift that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of the environment I grew up in, the mechanical and the engineering-ish side of stuff really was a learned craft more so
Yep.
than a natural craft.
You learned by osmosis, right? You got to
Yes.
see, it done. So out of curiosity, every artist I know, they have the one thing they always start drawing. My daughter is huge into art right now. She loves drawing people. It started out with eyes and then it went to noses. Now it's people. As a kid at the racetrack, what were you drawing? What was your inspiration at the time?
It probably won't come as a big shock to you or anybody else. It was predominantly cars.
Yep.
It was all I knew. My father was in the industry, ran an automotive service garage up until probably 3 years ago. He was involved daily in that part.
Mm-hmm.
So I was at his at his service station for the most of it growing up. When it was time to go to work, I was almost dragged out of bed Saturday mornings by my ears to go and learn the craft.
Yep.
But I was pretty much always immersed up to my neck in car stuff.
Yeah.
My doodles were all of the craziest cars at the track at the time, some of my own invention. Certainly the people around the track gathered, I guess, a fair bit of interest as well. And so I sort of honing my caricature skills and car doodling skills from a young age.
So what was your favorite car to draw then? Because it seems like everybody has their favorite thing they draw over and over. What was that one car you just kept trying to perfect?
Probably it sounds, I'd be lying if I said it probably wasn't one of the cars that my dad was driving and building throughout it. And it changed over the years of the car that he had. But we got to see so many of the big historical names, and I'm sure I didn't appreciate it as much as a kid as I do now, looking back through some of the old discoveries that I had stored away for the last 30, 40, 50 years. I guess that stuff have been tucked away. And it was the icons of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not much different than a young kid of an NHL player following his dad to work. Yep. And hanging out in the dressing rooms and the travel, all the behind the scenes stuff that most people don't get a chance to see.
Yep.
I was fortunate enough to live that firsthand, and really wish I would have appreciated it more, other than I guess, appreciated it for more for what it really was in a historic sense than just going to hang out at the track with the family on the weekends.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. One of my college teammates was Brian Trottier Jr. And he talks of he remembers his dad's time most in Pittsburgh, and at the
Mhm.
time, that team had a lot of veterans, and then you had this 18-year-old rookie named Jaromir Jagr on the team who still playing at 50 some odd years old. And he said, after practice, Jagr would come home with his dad and hang out with Trotz Jr. because they were closer in age than most of his teammates, and they would sit
Yeah.
around and play, NHL 94 all day. And he goes, I didn't think about it at the time. It was just, these are the people I was around every day. And it was just normal to him. And the rest of us in the locker room are like, are you kidding me? Like, you're sitting there being buddies with him. So it makes sense. And every child of an athlete or, somebody of note, they're just like, well, that was just mom or dad. And those were the people we hung around. And it reminds you that at the end of the day, the people we look up to are just people. They're no different than you or I.
Oh, very, very true. And it's something that I guess had to pick up really early on, probably not purposefully, but again, through the osmosis that you had mentioned earlier on. It didn't matter whether it was somebody pulling up to the pumps for gas, just a Bill Smith,
Mm-hmm.
or on the weekends you would be, I'm going to reach out to touch you, but as close as you are to me right now,
Yeah.
from the key players in the industry.
Yep.
And it was just, there were folks, there were people treated people nicely or not. And it didn't matter whether they were world-class stars or the guys next door. It was kind of a nice big pool to be around.
Yeah. And it's funny, the chances I've had to be around known people, the more you treat them like an everyday person and you're not in awe of them, the more personable they are and the more they
Mhm.
like you for it. It's like, oh, you're not one of those people that just wants my autograph and wants to hear all my stories. You're going to give it back to me and joke with me and all that good stuff. It's like, yep, yeah, that's how it is. You're just to quote Jacques Lemaire, one of the guys.
Mhm. And I think even Leonard Skinner even had a song about that if you want to talk about fishing, that's all right, but we'll leave the music stuff for some other point. So.
Yeah, exactly. So I apologize because I did my homework beforehand, and this is one of the things I wanted to ask. Growing up in Canada, were you a fan of hockey as a kid? Was it something on your radar, or were you just nose down into under the hood trying to absorb as much of motorsports as you could?
This is a part, and I still even have trouble saying it or understanding it, that I was never a hockey fan. Um, didn't watch it on television. I was certainly familiar with names of the era, of the Gordie Howes and the Bobby Orrs.
Mhm.
And I don't think you can walk the planet Earth and not be exposed to those caliber of players.
Yep.
But there was no rushing home for Saturday night to watch Hockey Night in Canada. It was a different world. I know my mother was a hockey fan, but it isn't anything that rubbed off on the rest of us for it. It was the first time that I saw people playing hockey on ice in person was the day that I delivered Mark LaForest's mask to him at the New York Rangers training camp. It seems odd, but we kind of started at the top and
Yeah.
worked backwards from there.
So you mentioned mom was the hockey fan. Out of curiosity, what was her team? Who did she root for?
I truly don't recall who she cheered for when it was happening. I know she was a big Wayne Gretzky fan, but I guess like all moms, she really took an interest in the teams that I worked with.
Okay.
And the players that I worked with. So there was a lot of hometown support, I guess, for the work that we did. And it's having that one step away from the actual event. So you get a bit of a bond with it, I think. So.
Yep. That makes complete sense. So as the story goes, both on your website and on the Vintage Goalie website, you kind of fell into this hockey universe by accident when a friend of yours who played rec hockey wanted you to paint him a mask. When did that happen? Was this, in the high school years? How old about were you at that time when he was like, "Hey, you got some skill, put something on the mask"?
Yeah, old enough to know better is probably the correct answer for that. But it would have been, yeah, mid-20s, mid to late 20s, I guess, when that all started to roll. Um, I had, again, my career, I'm still hands in some interior refinishing and some cool art pieces there, um, as well as involved on the weekends, continued on in motorsports as well for when my dad retired from racing. Um, excuse me, I had no choice but to be involved with it. It was almost a foregone conclusion. So I went through the driving aspect and the schooling there, and picked up into some of the crew work that the folks that looked after my father's racing program in the latter years
Hmm.
also then rolled on and got into Can-Am, and then subsequently IndyCar work with Jacques Villeneuve Senior, the uncle, not the younger Jacques,
Okay.
and that sort of crossed into or wide out into work with Porsche endurance racing. And again, a lot of these people that I had met, I guess that my father was racing with, or were on his team, that went off in these other branches and grew. A lot of them became a very good source of information, a lot of very good help in the initial sorting out of concepts for what the original mask was. But while that was on a parallel path, yeah, there was the friend of mine from town who, I guess, as these combo masks were first starting to take root and really gain some steam. Again, he probably, like a lot of other goaltenders of the year, said, "Wow, I've got to get one of these playing.
Yep.
They're really cool." And found somebody to build him his mask, and then, as you made note, wanted my help in as far as laying some paintwork on it and styling it.
So he didn't just come to you to say, "Hey, can you paint a mask I already have?" He said, "Hey, I want you to build me a mask and maybe put something pretty on it."
No, the first step actually was where he had, again, I didn't know he was doing this, but went out and found someone to build him a mask.
Okay.
Um, and then when he got the mask back, it was then my job to paint his mask for him.
Okay.
And so we disassembled the mask and got it ready to go. And
And then the gears started going, and you were kind of like, I might be able to do something better than this.
it started that way. Yeah, we were a little disappointed with the fit and finish of the part when we got it back. And
Mm-hmm.
from the art side, I had the mechanical side. He was also in an automotive industry and in the bodywork side of things. So there was some room for improvement, we thought.
Yep.
And then, as I say, the gears start turning with, how can we make this, or how can I make this better?
Mm-hmm.
And so left with a clean sheet of paper, or starting with a clean sheet of paper, and not having any preconceived, preconditioned views as to how the product should be, other than what I had in front of me and what you would obviously see in the newspaper, the odd television clip that you pass
Yep.
over. And it was probably the thing that helped make the Armadilla that I built as distinctive and different and as what it was, because we weren't in the vacuum that everybody that else is in the hockey industry is. They've of all the other masks that have come along since the late 80s.
They have a similar style to them. The holes might be different. There might be a little bit different ribbing, but your mask is really the only one that has a different profile to it. All of them kind of have a similar. If you were to, I'll step back. You could use a simple mask template to draw up what you want. It doesn't matter if it's a old iTech, a Bauer, a CCM, or even the new Warriors. but the Armadilla, it had its own unique look. You can spot an Armadilla out of the crowd any day, but some of these other ones, it's like, well, is that a Warrior or is that a CCM? I'm not
Right.
entirely sure.
Yeah, and they all seem to draw from, I think anybody else in the industry knows, probably one of the, I guess, the leading makers, and has the most number of goalies that he's worked with over the years, built some incredible stuff with Greg Harrison.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah. As an Eddie Belfour fan, he made the iconic original Belfour Eagle mask. So yes, I'm familiar with his work.
And the list goes on from there. He was really influential in that whole concept. So most of the other builders, to paraphrase the whole concept of it, but I was a goalie, I wanted a mask, I built myself a mask.
Yep.
My buddy wanted one, I built him one too, and so on and so on. They told two friends, and just like that old shampoo.
So the story goes.
Yeah. So anybody who was in the industry playing and wanted a mask was reminded multiple times a day or multiple times a week of, this is what the gold standard for a product should be.
Right.
So they all subconsciously, or a lot of them consciously, borrowed very strongly from Greg's build concept. And that's why you see the look of them. So many of them are the same.
Yep. Because
they shared his concepts.
Yep.
And not coming from that part of the world, I really wasn't, let's say, preconditioned that it had to look this way, or it didn't have to protect this way. So having a different life to draw from, a different set of skill sets, just a whole clear, open mind to approach the task, it resulted in a different product.
Yeah, and a different product that, like you said, was the first one to get CSA certification. And probably to this day, some would argue the safest goalie mask on the market.
I don't think that'd be too far off. That'll take us down a whole other path as far as the state of the industry and masks and that whole product. That'd be a heck of a rabbit hole to fall into.
That's why I put my notes together, because I easily fall down rabbit holes.
Yeah, I got a feeling I don't know, we'll have service for drinks and snacks later, but this could go on for quite some time. But the mission, the whole concept for the Armadilla, or the mission statement behind it, was build the best mask available. No excuses. No, we would have done this except it costs this much. Or it was, I was fortunate that I had access to some of the technology that the Indy cars were built from. Some of the greatest minds in the industries, from the composite materials to overall engineering, some of the best fabricators that have ever existed. And these were the folks in my sandbox. So it was, and all the goofy ideas I had coming up would present it to the different layer of brains, and they would either say, yes, let's run with this, or suggest I would go a different direction, or laugh at me. It was a full carnival of different emotions I got back. But
well, the idea of using auto racing as the background for protecting the head, when you step back and look at it and go, well, that makes sense, because they spent years and a lot of money and research to keep their drivers safe. So to use that knowledge base and that background makes sense. And when you start thinking about football, you would think they'd do the same thing. And now they've gone a different route, but that's again another rabbit hole. But it makes sense to rely on the expertise and the knowledge of a group of people that have spent so much time and effort already researching it.
And it is, and you had mentioned, certainly with the auto racing and football, that neither of those industries, football up until the last 5 years or so, they've really picked up their game. But motorsports in general is what you win with today is obsolete 6 months from now.
Yep.
There is always the push for everything. There's always better. And they shave decimals to find out what that better is. And it's not just, hey, we've got a working package, we can ride on this for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
You take a look at what IndyCar is, or the Formula One industry. The state-of-the-art vehicle from 5 years ago, it isn't fit to make the track now in comparison.
And I'm not a huge car person, just because I grew up with a dad who didn't know how to change his own oil. God love him.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I've always appreciated about auto racing is a guy wins the pole, he's still going to tinker on his car until the race starts. Like you said, they're never satisfied. And at the same time, the governing bodies of auto racing, they're not going to wait till the end of the year to change a rule. If it makes sense, we're going to change it between two races. It's like you said, never being happy with what you have. Always make it better.
And from a performance standpoint, and probably even more so yet from the safety part of it.
Yep.
With the headgear or the helmets that they wear, every 5 years they rewrite the safety standards for helmets.
Mm-hmm.
So what you would wear as a driver, if I went and bought a helmet today and up to the most current standards, it's superseded with a new model, better, faster, lighter, stronger 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the rules are set up, I think they grandfather in, depending on the industry or the class that you're in, they give you a 5-year grace period. So you can, in essence, get 10 years out of a helmet, which most of the guys that I've worked with would go through 10 helmets a season, as opposed to one helmet for 10 seasons. But it's mandated in the rules that all your safety gear, from the suits that you wear and the level of fire protection to the shoes and gloves and helmets, the safety belts, everything is it's updated every handful of years. So
yeah, and that's I think that's fantastic. As I said, my dad couldn't change the oil in our vehicles to save his life, but what he was really good at was firefighting. That was his job, 30 years in Chicago. And my cousin, who's also a firefighter, loves auto racing. So my dad taught auto extrication. So in terms, he can't fix a car, but he can tear one apart in minutes. He's great at that. But he had some connections to folks at the Chicago Motor Speedway and got him and my cousin in on one of the races.
Nice.
And he thought that this will be neat from my dad's standpoint to look at cars he doesn't get to look at every day and figure out how can I tear it apart. And my cousin was like, this is great. I get to go to a race for free, but sit in the pits. Well, my cousin's pit that he was assigned to, because as you know, every crew gets their own fire crew. So my cousin's pit was right in the middle of pit row. He had a view about this big of the race.
Yes.
And my dad, his pit that he was assigned to was the very first one in the pit row. Okay. So he had the whole turn, and his guy crashed on the second lap. So they had all day just to walk the infield and do whatever. And my cousin's going, how do you like them apples? The one guy who doesn't know anything about auto racing gets the best view of the track.
And a free pass to cruise around.
Yeah, exactly. But back to my notes here. I'm going to try and say somewhat on them. So you mentioned Mark LaForest earlier. He was the first pro goalie you had with the Rangers, and you've shared pictures of his mask on Instagram, and it's on your webpage, and it's a very simple, blue background, nice looking, almost like oak tree on it on either side to fit the name LaForest. How did you start at the top with the pros? How did you get connected with him to really open that door with the Rangers?
I guess that it intermixed with it also probably I'll start with luck. Probably the easiest way to say it. The timing of being in the right spot at the right time, because it timed out. It wasn't weeks after we undertook the project of painting my friend's mask and getting that done and tuned up. Right when that project came to completion, and there was some rumblings and chat about the start of this new mask that we're going to design and build. And it timed out with John Brown, the equipment manufacturer. I think Mark was one of his guys he had, and they would travel around to different sports stores throughout the off season as a bit of a promotion and stirring up some interest in their gear. And they would have, I guess, their pro goalies show up at different retail stores around as a great drawing crowd to bring the folks in and get your stuff autographed and meet the pros. The sports store in our town, again, I didn't know it was having Mark in on a Saturday afternoon to show the gear off and sign autographs and meet folks. And so the buddy of mine was aware of this, and a friend of his worked at the store. So it was kind of an easy trip in to stand in line and conversation. I think my buddy might have brought his mask along as a bit of a talking point, and Mark showed a fair bit of interest in it. And at one point said, "Oh, that's really cool. Could you guys make me a mask?" And without thinking, yes was the instant response that happened for it, and realizing that training camp really wasn't that far away. So it was really had to push the go button and really accelerate the timeline from concept and development and to get his piece ready for him. And it was, I think anybody who's ever started their own deal up have the same story of it. I guess up till the almost completion, there was working your day job, then working this project in evenings and weekends.
Yep.
And the last week leading up to it, I think I woke up to start my day job on Wednesday. The timeline was at crunch, worked overnight Wednesday on the mask project, day job on Thursday, overnight Thursday on the mask, day job Friday. And then after the day job Friday, finished off the finishing touches on the paint work. And it was 11 o'clock Friday night that we actually had to hang our freshly cleared wet paint with coat hangers in the back of my van, and started our trip to New York to deliver this mask that we had to meet up with Mark. It started Saturday, a training camp did. So we hit the road with the mask dripping wet in paint, with all the cages and the foam and the bits and pieces just kind of in bags that we had to take with us, and assembly of the product happened en route. So I'm sure by the time we got to New York with this freshly almost dry mask, that I'm sure Mark must have got a bit of a chemical buzz off it, just because the paint was still gassing off on him by the time we got to him. So.
Now, looking at that original mask, it has that Armadilla look and feel to it, but you can tell there were some refinements made after that. Was Mark instrumental in helping you say, that I really like this part, or was it just kind of that ongoing auto racing, things can always be better mentality that you continued to make refinements and different versions?
Yeah, certainly refinements are always, and purposefully as well as subconsciously, that gear is always turning to make things better, faster, stronger, lighter. When Mark's first one was built, the friend of mine that was involved with it was very steeped in hockey, and had, I don't want to say it was a 50-50 deal that we had going on, but both of us were putting our work and our efforts and thoughts into it.
Mm-hmm.
And he drew very heavily, as all the other mask makers of the era did, on what he saw on TV every Saturday night.
Right.
It had to be this way, and it had to fit like this. I guess I pushed for enough of my own tweaks and bits into it to start some of the early Armadilla feel and concept and ideas into it.
Yep.
And it was probably just that. It was maybe a 50% version of what the final 2.0 turned out to be.
Yeah, because I've only seen an Armadillo mask in person once. I was working hockey camps in college, and we had this squirt goalie from St. Louis, Missouri, and he was a huge John Vanbiesbrouck fan. And I remember he had the Vanbiesbrouck Armadilla mask, and I was like, this is awesome. I got to check it out. Unfortunately, his head was smaller than mine, so it didn't fit in the mask. So I was able to look at it, hold it, and everything is like, I like this. And that was the only one I've ever seen in person, but I could just, there was something about picking it up. You felt it had a different feel to it. It was a solid feel to it, and but it was still light, which was, you look at it and you think it's going to be a heavy mask, and it really wasn't. It was a very nice light mask, and the little things about it, like the rubber around the back on the edges. That to me, is somebody who lugs my bag around, goes, well, that's just going to save the paint job. But little things like that, the attention to detail on that mask was amazing.
No, thank you for noticing. It's yeah, there was a number of, again, I didn't know things were being done differently because I really wasn't aware of the way they were being done in the first place.
Right. Well, that's how real change happens, though.
Mhm.
You go in it with not a great word for it, but an ignorant view of it, not knowing how everybody else is doing it, and you come up with a completely different way that most of the time is a better way of doing it.
To improve, you have to change.
Yep.
To keep doing the same, there's so many different memes and analogies and blips out there of that definition of insanity of doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And a lot of that was stuff that really frustrated me while I was in the industry building pro and retail product, which in as what it was the same part, the same stuff. John or Kelly or Brian or any of our pro guys we've worked with wore is exactly the same mask that what minor hockey kids would wear. There was no watered down version or a souped up version. It was the same product was available and fit all the different areas. So it wasn't really different in that respect.
Well, when I read that, as a consumer and somebody who recently bought a mask a year and a half, 2 years ago, and really did my research because I've had a few concussions, I loved that because the idea wasn't, well, we have a model for your price point. It was, this is the safest model we have, so it's the only model we're going to sell. Because I see that with a lot of these different mask makers. They have the different, well, if you're playing squirt hockey, you don't need pro level protection. Why not? It's our head, it's our brain. Why don't we need pro? If there's one piece of equipment where we need pro level protection, it should be the head.
Yeah, it is, and I can truly see there's some of the kids that started, or the younger ones that I've worked with over the years. Certainly, the caliber of shots that a lot of 10-year-olds can create, doesn't rival NHL caliber shots coming in. No. But the adverse side of it is that the product that I built was light as probably still is to this day. A finished Armadilla I built comes in at under 2 pounds. And so it, aside from being exceptionally protective from impact and the forces of pucks and physical contact, it was probably the only one that the younger kids could safely support. Like their necks were probably no bigger around than my wrist. Right. So to have to put a 5 or whatever pound mask on top of some young kid, it's got to be pretty exhausting, and had the chance then of, I guess, causing its own set of injuries from just the head not and the neck not having enough support to deal with it. So.
Yeah. So I want to get back to talking about Mark LaForce. I'm going to guess he was your into the New York Rangers, essentially, because as far as I know, your next pro goalie to wear the mask was John Vanbiesbrouck. So did he see Mark's mask and say, hey, because at the time he was wearing a combo. He was wearing the Cooper SK 2000 or whatever it is. And, you know, at one point he had the Hasha cage, and then he went with the cat eye cage, you know. Is that what happened? He just saw Mark's and said, I want to try one of those? Or how did that introduction happen?
Yeah, I wish it was that easy. It did, for, again, with the response that we had with Mark, and just a super nice guy to start out with. He was I think if you could go back and write the script as far as decent guys to meet and help you along the way, and just being welcoming and just nice about the whole thing. He was a pretty cool guy.
Yeah.
But as it went through with Mark and the spin we got from it, our next step was a goalie for the Kitchener Rangers, a big junior A squad in town. How the whole 6 degree of separation thing connects. The guy that we knew that worked at the sports store, his mom and dad billeted players for junior A players when they would come to town. And it turned out that his family billeted the goaltender from our local hockey club. So word of the mask we built for Mark spread, and pretty quickly in our own hometown. And so the next part that we built actually went on this junior A player, a fellow by the name of Mike Torchia, who went on to bigger and better things with Minnesota and Dallas, and had just a tremendous talent, just a really, really talented dude. And that was the point where I started looking at, this is now going to be my day job. So we worked on developing a product that was going to make it through CSA, dealing with manufacturing issues and repetitiveness and all the stuff that we had to do our background on, and refine, as you made mention before, refine the original version of which Mark and which Mike Torchia ended up getting one of the original styles as well, and refine that into an easier reproduced product that turned out to be lighter, faster, stronger, all the things that we try to get it to do. And while that was going on, the idea of, I guess when you develop a product, I think everybody has visions of it will be in every store around the world and it will be world domination and everybody needs to have one of these. And during that earlier gathering of the troops, we knew we had to deal with retail stores to get the product out. There was, again, this was well before internet yet. Everything was shoe leather and phone calls to make things happen. And in Canada, they had the Canadian Sporting Goods Association, which was sort of the umbrella that all the retail stores became a part of, and they have their big buyers show, I guess, or the big show every year in February in Montreal. So as a bit of a recon, I made the trip down to Montreal and walked the show and just trying to get a feel for the new industry that I was getting involved with. And it happened to be the same year that they released the San Jose Sharks uniforms, when they did the big display of that happened. The unveiling was at the show, and saw them drop the curtain on that, and was amazed as probably what everybody else was when they saw the teals and silvers and blacks and the shark eating the stick and the whole deal. It was a pretty cool time. So out that night with some folks from our part of the world, met from London and other Ontario folks in the industry, we're out and enjoying some time at a jazz club in downtown Montreal. And the talk obviously turned to that was kind of the highlight of the day of what these new uniforms were like, and sitting at the bar and said, wow, if I ever get a chance to make a shark mask, still being in dream stage at that point. Yeah. And I grabbed a hold of a cocktail napkin and I doodled out if I'm ever going to make a shark mask, this is what it should probably look like. And
that was the iconic Brian Hayward mask.
And it's exactly what it turned into. Yes. And took that napkin, crumpled it up, stuck it in my pocket. And when I got home a couple of days later, I had the napkin and built I guess in the art world, they're referred to as artist proofs, where you test out. And I wanted to get it down on hard copy and create a 3-dimensional mask to make sure that the concept worked. And I did, and that piece is sitting right up above me on the shelf of the first original concept off that napkin doodle.
And do you still have the napkin though?
The original napkin, no. I had to, wish I did. And I wouldn't want to guess as to where it ended up, because that kind of like when I was racing, we were going to the races with Pop. You just never realized the intensity of the moment when you were there.
Yeah.
Looking back on it all these years later, and it's like, man, that stupid piece of paper would be really, really cool to have right now.
Yep.
Working, you mentioned before about Matt with Vintage Goalie. He put a lot of he and I worked together. He put a lot of effort into coming up with the Armadilla story when we did our first Legends
Yep.
package together. So for one of the photo mock-ups, I doodled up it got the same type of napkin and staged a shot, right? I sketched up the shark mask on that napkin and staged the shot of the old jazz club that it was in. So I've got a replication of, or a duplicate of, just for that was done for that photo shoot. And I think it's probably over on my shelf somewhere over there. But
so you create this artist proof of the iconic Brian Hayward mask. How did he find out about this mask and say, I want that?
Yeah, it sat up, I guess once I finished the artist proof, it ended up sitting up on the shelf in my shop for good 4 to 6 months, I bet, just collecting dust, being cool. I guess sitting up on the shelf. When they announced the team, I guess it was like an unprotected draft, I guess, where they picked up guys that were existing in the team already, or in other teams already. And Brian was tagged as the goaltender for it. My lack of knowledge of hockey, for all I knew at the time, you could have been Brian Hayward. I had no idea who the guy was. And as that was announced, and it turned out that Brian was, his mom and dad lived probably a half hour, 45 minutes from where I live, where the shop was. And he traveled around in the summer. It was either a 3-on-3 or a 4-on-4 road hockey scenario that he would go travel from town to town with, and from kids to young adults, I guess, whatever their competitions. And found out that by the time I figured this out, he had been through my town and on to the next one already. So I missed that opportunity. By the time I figured it out, he was going to be 45 minutes or so away in another town, and actually had to go to my mom and get a hockey card from one of Brian's hockey cards from her, so that I knew what the guy looked like. And as I drove out to where the new shop, where his new street hockey tournament was going on, and I packed up my casting kit to get his head mold, hopefully, and brought along that artist proof of the shark mask that's been, and had to wipe the dust off it and clean it to take it out and show him that it was in the shop. And wandering around the arena, holding up this card, trying to put a face that matched the picture on the card. And finally did connect with him, and introduced myself, and pulled the artist proof out of the bag, and basically explained to him what I was doing. And he stuck it on and quick ran into the bathroom to do a mirror test on it, I guess.
Every goalie's got to see how they look with their new mask.
That's everybody's first step with that.
And,
he came back and said, yeah, I'd like to do this, but I'm leaving for training camp it was either a week or a week and a half, when he was hopping on a jet to California. And probably like Mark's scenario, it was like, sure, we can get that ready for you. And so I cast him up that day, and from there hauled it back to the shop and built a plaster positive from it, and just went through the process of creating him his version of that shark mask. And it was the night before he was leaving to go to California. I drove to his mom and dad's place and met with him and the family, and I had tea and pie on the front porch with the Hayward family, and got Brian his new mask. And not sure there was even many adjustments that needed to be done to it that evening. And next day he was off to California, and I think it was 3 days after that, back when we had answering machines back then, a little box that sat on your desk beside your phone that would record incoming phone calls that you weren't able to pick up on. And there was a couple calls, and one in particular came through was from a client of mine in Toronto that was almost out of breath himself and said, like, dude, you've got to grab a USA Today, which at the time was a newspaper.
Yep.
They
Yeah,
were
they
still
just
in-
recently ended printing. I'm an
Yeah.
old newspaper guy, so I'm very, very familiar with it.
Okay. And the newspapers at the time were sold in little metal boxes parked at the side of
Yep.
the road, usually near bus stops. So I hopped on my bike and I blasted all around town to grab today's copy of USA Today, and it nice color shot of it on the front page of the sports section, and with I think a blurb of Sharks goalie has menacing mask, kind of a phrase to it. And at that point, I think that's really when the fuse got lit and when things really started to take off. Newspapers back in the early 90s were that was the internet. That's where everybody got their news from.
Yep.
So
I missed those
caught
days.
Yeah. Yes. And it popped up in posters, and it was a really high profile piece. Again, it really caught me off guard as to how much traction that thing got. So it took off. Hayward got a ton of exposure with it, and it certainly helped raise our profile from 0 to 100 in a matter of a week. And so, and again, while I was then working on retail orders, a product that was being distributed worldwide at that point, I've got clients that went from Japan right through the United States and different parts of Canada and over in Europe, all back before internet stuff. So it was kind of really crazy how much of a spread that had happened really organically on its own.
Yeah. So before I go too long, I want to ask, are you good on time? Because I see we're closing in on an hour, but I feel like we got a good discussion going here. So
Oh yeah, no, I live here, so I'm not going anywhere.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So the Hayward mask, like you said, that's an iconic mask that if folks haven't replicated the open shark's mouth, they've replicated that idea different ways from, any kind of animal or something with the mouth open. So you really hit the scene with him. But I would argue people know you more for the Vanbiesbrouck mask. So
yeah,
how did that connection start? I assumed it was just because of Mark that, your Ranger connection, looking from the outside in, that's what I figured, but it doesn't sound like that was the case.
Certainly the connection with Mark paid strong dividends to get a base with the New York Rangers.
Yeah.
A new guy to an industry that I didn't have years of history with, and a multitude of connections with trainers and players and stuff. It was really, really green as far as the contact went. One of the younger kids that I built a mask for that lived in Poughkeepsie, New York, of all crazy places, was at a goaltending camp over the summer. Had one of my masks, and they had a guest instructor in, and turned out to be Mike Richter was the guest instructor at this camp.
Yep.
From the way this kid's dad explained it to me during the phone call that night, that Mike was really taken with your mask, thought it was really cool, just went on and on about how the interaction between Mike and his son went that day. So it was suggested to me that I need to call the Rangers, book an appointment, and talk to Mike. I did that and reached out, and it happened to be the same trainer that was there when I worked with Mark the year prior, and set a time up to stop into their facility. And they were in Rye, New York, I think is where their training facility was at that time. Made the trip down, booked the trip, and met up with Mike, got him cast, but it was really much more lukewarm than what this kid's dad had led me to believe it was going to be.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because he's known for wearing another iconic mask, a Chevrolet mask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Ed's and a couple others throughout the year too. He's switched and played around with stuff, but yeah, it was as far as visuals go, certainly a real standout in that era as well. After meeting with Mike and on down on the floor, and while we chatted, and I saw John walk by the open door for the trainer's room, and you could, and it's the sound you hear a lot around a basketball court, or the sound of the running shoes or sneakers breaking quickly, and you get that peeling, burning rubber sound as John stopped and quickly backed up and poked his head in the door and saw the masks on the ground. And I think I said, well, who are these? And they pointed to me, and I kind of raised my hand a bit, and John came over and they're really polite about it, asked if he could take a look at one, and he picked it up and rolled it around in his hands. And as the conversation rolled on, he said, I'm actually on my way out for a scrimmage. Is there any way I can try one of these in the scrimmage? And again, yes is my favorite answer to a lot of these questions. I got John fit up, and these were all understandably just stock, off the shelf retail kind of product. They're not really fit to anyone. So we got one and had it fit to him best we could for a standard piece. And he went out and played his scrimmage, and afterward he skated back over the boards and commented that I got hit in the head somewhere over here, I think, once. How do I get one of these? Kind of paraphrasing that whole bit of conversation. So by the time I left there that day, I had sat with John while he was getting his post-game rub down, and we discussed the simplicity of his first mask coming out, and as far as the paint imagery on it goes. And again, when that was done, I hauled it back home here and got his cast built up and the shell prepped and painted, and was back in Rye 1 week later for the start of training camp. And it was, I think, kind of cool to be able to turn one around that quickly. And that was sort of the start with John. It again, probably one of the longest running relationships I've had in the industry, and just real stand-up guy.
And I think that first New York mask of his with the New York skyline and the bees flying around, it's often overlooked by, fans of goalie mask art, because it's so simple and it screams New York, but still has, the individual player's personality in it, which is just fantastic. So that's one of those. I wish he was in New York a little bit longer so we could see him in that one more. But, as you said, just like Brian, there was the expansion team claimed John in the expansion draft, and you found out he was going to Florida, and their name was the Panthers. So as the story goes on Matt's Vintage Goalie site, pre-internet, you went down to the library and did some research on Panthers, because you had the idea of, Brian Haywards shark mask, but with the Panther, and you created a realistic looking Panther. But again, as the story goes, John loved it, but management wanted something that looked a little more like the team logo and colors. So first question is, are there pictures of that original one? Because I haven't been able to find them on the internet. And B, when you came back with what we all know as the Panther mask, anybody thinks of a Florida Panther mask, they think of Vanbiesbrouck's mask. I can't imagine anybody had anything wrong with it when they saw that second go at the design.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to this is where the big shovelful of luck came into it. There wasn't a Hollywood director with a wonderful script that worked its way through all these different steps. I know back to the earlier bit of the point that, there's John Skyline map is certainly one of my faves. It was just keen and quirky, and it had, as you say, all very New York, but certainly with the swarm of killer bees coming in over, it was kind of fun. It was short-lived. It only did the last half of the season for John in New York. When he got picked up by Florida, I remember the phone call that, again, probably with the guys that I worked with, I'm really, really fortunate that they really didn't micromanage any of the stuff that I came up with. John's suggestion was, I like what you did with Brian in San Jose. Can we do something like that for the Panthers? Which is what took us down the path of that
Yeah.
realistic looking original Panther. It certainly hit the target for what we both wanted, but you can't ignore the level of impact that the Panthers uniforms and the colors were probably as much of an impact as San Jose's were.
Mm-hmm.
Was really lucky to be in that spot at the right time with San Jose and with Florida. It just right place at the right time, and it was everything worked out. When the note came back in, or the call came back in that everybody digs it, but yeah, that's but is almost one of the bad words, like just for me. It just is an exceptionally disrespectful word.
It means you're going to have a busy weekend, right?
That's exactly. and I to this day still remember sitting on the front porch of my old house with a brand new shell covered in masking tape that I would always. The majority of the masks I did, I actually sketched the image right onto the mask with pencil over top of made my own stencil with masking tape and cut it with an X-Acto knife to get the patterns I wanted. But I do remember sitting on my porch sketching out that the now famous Panther mask, and it just fell into place. There was just so many things that I didn't have to struggle with it. It was just all the get as squirrely and cosmic as you want to, but there was no fighting with it. There was no erasing and starting over or trying to scramble to get that idea. It just felt right each step of the way for that piece, and had a fairly long life for the years that John played as well as he did in Florida, and the cup run that he had, and it was kind of nice to be able to get him multiples of those throughout the years in Florida.
Well, and there's those great shots of him when he's kind of hunched over with his head down, and that forehead it looks like the Panther's just staring you down. It's like when I think of John Vanbiesbrouck in Florida, that's the shot I think of, is him with that head down and it just coming at you. So again, that original Panther mask, did you keep it? Did John keep it? Are there pictures of it even floating around anymore?
The original one, yes, and I could probably dig one up on my computer that I'm sitting in front of now, and not sure how I'd turn the screen around to show you the image, but I'll send you one after we disconnect.
Oh, that'd be beautiful.
I'll get you some of the stuff. All those shots would have been on film, which was before digital.
Hey, that's how I learned how to take pictures. I still remember taking black and white photography in college, and you shoot a whole roll of film, and one little mistake when developing it, and the whole row shot. It's like, oh. It was a lot of pain that went through, but I spent a fair bit of time in that part of the world as well, or that industry, and just trying to document. Back at the time, there really wasn't a lot of artistic work done. I didn't see the need for it back then. Part of me wishes I could go back and repeat or get a do-over on some of those spots, and being able to better record and have better records of what had happened back in the day. I had Kelly Hrudy on the podcast a little while back, and another great Armadilla mask. And I think what's interesting about John and Kelly is they didn't wear the popular cat eye cage. They both went with what a lot of us goalies call the bird cage. And I remember reading, I don't know if it was Kelly or John, said that the cage was designed so perfectly that to them, they didn't see the need for the cat eye. Because to me, the beauty of the cat eye is we have great vision. The bars for the bird cage always seem to fall like right here on the top of the eye, or right below, or in the middle, where you kind of find yourself. But your design had it where the bars were perfect. They didn't feel the need to go to that cat eye. And we all know that the bird cage is safer. So I think it was Kelly that I remember reading that about. But when I talked to him, he loved the Hollywood mask. But he mentioned that if you got real close, each one of those little film strips were supposed to be a different, image, like a real film strip. So, part of me thinks if it were created today, we'd have actual images because the technology has come so far from actual movies. But was there a specific movie you had in your head that you were trying to recreate, or were you just kind of doodling on that film strip?
There was I guess with Kelly's, and again, I wasn't so much micromanaged by any of the guys that I work with.
Yeah.
There was a few folks that were very interested in Kelly switching from his helmet and cage style into a proper mask and cage.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of input as far as concepts and ideas, and no question it had to be Los Angeles. And there was so many iconic images and feelings and thoughts of what Los Angeles is. And I think everybody that was involved in that information gathering process, everybody was really strong on the Hollywood. That was
nothing screams LA more than that.
That first thing you think of when you think of the town, or at least as a Canadian, that's one of the spots that we see, and it's an iconic piece. So had to build Kelly's around that, and there was from the Man's Chinese Theater to the Walk of Fame to obviously the film industry and the spotlights, and it was trying to take all the bits of information that everybody would send my direction of trying to get things in, and try to brew it into a tasteful soup, and try to distill it down and pick the top pieces. So it was, I don't think going for anything in particular other than to create the feel and the ambiance of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, to get all the concepts that everybody kind of threw into the meetings and all the notes that I had to take, Kelly probably could have had about 6 or 8 different masks with all the bits of information, because it's quite a town, and it's a lot of really recognizable stuff that makes Los Angeles Los Angeles.
Well, and with Kelly, that was an interesting one for you, because you didn't just stop at the mask with him. You took that film strip onto his pads as well, I remember. You know, what was that like when they're like, we want you to make his mask, but oh yeah, what about his pads? What can you do there?
It was as technology was advancing. We worked again for not being a hockey guy, was fortunate enough to where I live, where I grew up, and some will say haven't quite grown up yet, but where I've spent my younger years seems to be within probably a 200-mile radius of where 90% of all the hockey equipment in the world is created, in parts of southern Ontario and bits into Quebec. And so we had access to a lot of the equipment manufacturers were based nearby. And when Kelly made the switch to, I guess at the time might have even still been called Cooper at the time.
Yep,
the way
it was
branded.
Cooper and then later Bauer. Yep.
Yes. Okay. Worked with some transfer technology, were mimicking those film strips that you would talk about, or those frames of the film, used some transfer materials that had to be ironed on to the actual pads that Kelly, the pieces of the pads. So worked with Cooper and one of their agents to get some uncut or unassembled cuts of Kelly's pads before they were done, and transferred that image onto his pad set. Worked with him on the color combos and I guess the decor of his glove and blocker as well, that came part of that set. So it was a chicken or the egg, maybe because it's the Hollywood LA and the visibility, and that you had to look the part while you were out there.
Yep.
I know just Kelly was probably one of my favorite people to work with in that he was always up for something cool.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not sure which one came first, but it was always pushing the envelope a bit for him. He was kind of nice to be able to work with him on that in those eras. And I say still have the odd conversation back and forth through Instagram or text and stuff. We keep in touch. And
he's a fun fellow to talk to, and I'm a bit of a craft beer geek, and he likes his craft beer, so we recorded our podcast episode over beers. So,
I remember watching that and having the certainly a glass nearby for each.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, he's a fun person to talk to. Um, so let me get back to my notes here. I got to scroll here because I haven't paid attention to him for a while. Well, as we talk about Kelly's pads, I don't know if you've seen the stuff that Bauer and now CCM are doing, where they're using digital printing on the pads. And, if you think about that and the ideas that you could have, um, the idea you had within the limits of what you could do at the time versus now. I mean, do you sometimes just daydream what could that set really looked like head to toe if you had today's technology?
I'd be lying if I said no. The technology in every industry has come
Yep.
so far from the manufacturing stuff with the computer aided design, the rapid prototyping of people that have even their own desktop printers now to build stuff,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be little parts. But yeah, to be able to make use of the technology, it would have been so much easier. Everything that was done, everything on the Armadillo was created by hand. The original
Mm-hmm.
sculptures were shaped by, there's a mix of wood and fiberglass and balsas and bondos and
Mm-hmm.
shaping and sanding and scraping and filling, and just the pattern making that had to go into that was, I get weak thinking about all the hours that we spent doing it. And now for those who are skilled in that mindset, have, for what they can deal with on their own computer, to build things and create them in 3 dimension and push a button and have it go directly to a printer and either have a mold carved out or a positive built. The stuff that they're doing with the printing and the art side of stuff now. Yeah, I've not been in it really deep, or deeply, more correctly. Uh, but what happens that I've seen with the pads, that, as you say, with the digital printing, there isn't the texture on the pads now as what there were back in the day.
Yep.
The knee rolls and the thighs, and it's almost like one big blank sheet, which is what I started with years ago with the
Yeah.
mask. So they're really not confined by historic guidelines or everything. It's wide open now, so it would be
Yeah.
probably a fun time to be in it, having that much freedom and that much availability for cool stuff to play with.
Yeah, some of the stuff that comes out, even if I wouldn't personally wear it, there's one mass painter out there where I think his stuff has a lot going on, but I look at it and go, that's beautiful. It's beautiful work, and I really appreciate what not only the other different mass painters, but what these equipment companies are starting to do, whether
Yes.
whether I like the final product or not. I have a great appreciation for it.
Yeah, and that's kind of it, because the imagery has changed so much,
Mhm.
and to a lot of people's dismay, that it's gotten away from the recognizable imagery that, I'll bring Greg back into it again. His work was standout as far as some
Yeah.
of the imagery he came out with.
Yeah, you could sit in the 300 level and tell what was on that mask.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, that was part of the clean sheet, that it needed to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, the level of skill that some of these painters or designers are working with, it's crazy. Some of the airbrush ability that they have, but I don't think it's the right tool for the job sometimes, because even from what I've seen, some close-up stuff, being over at my father-in-law's place, and he's a big hockey guy, and the TV's always on, and
Yeah.
when the camera would zoom in on Goalie X, um, even with that close-up, you'd really have to stop and try to force yourself to figure out what it is. Not that art always needs to be something, but when you're playing in a team sport, dressed in a team uniform, there, I would say really strongly, you would need to have a team association to match and to fit with
Yep.
the team that you're playing for. Um, and I think that's been lost. There's been too much personal gratification that's made its way from, which was used to be on the back cap of the mask, is where we would save those. Here's a picture of my dog, or
Yeah.
here's all the Stanley Cups I've won, or here's my hot rod that you mentioned with Ed Belfour earlier on, would have his picture of his Willies on the back. Now that has been given a big heaping dose of steroids, and it's morphed its way onto the front of the mask.
And eventually the pads.
Yes, yeah, and it's kind of been, it's snapped back and gone so far strong the other way. So it's hard to ignore the ability and the talent that it takes to create an image that way. I guess I'm a bit, I guess I am old school, no guessing about it. But as far as the styling go, there's a tool for a job.
Yep.
And I've always been fond of a chainsaw instead of the scalpel that a lot of the guys today are using.
I'm in the same camp as you, in that I like the clean, simple lines. But again, it doesn't take away from the skill and the artistry of the other ones. I was talking to Kevin Woodley from the In Goal magazine group, and he said, his favorite mask is Alex Auld from when he played for Montreal, because from afar it looked like Ken Dryden's old mask with the circles on it. But when you got up close, you could see the images of the great Canadian goalies of over the years. And so he liked it because it was a mix of that old school and the new school. And it, I think there's something to that as well of, there is a right balance. But I'm with you. I like the crisp, clean lines with it. That just might be our age too.
Yeah. And that's got to play a part in it, and the experiences that we've had. It is, I like to think it's art. From the sculpture of the actual mask itself is art. The imagery that goes on it is art. To say that Rembrandt is better art than Picasso, it isn't fair. They each have their own disciples and followers, and red isn't a better color than blue. So there has to be, I guess, opinions and personal tastes taken into it. Unlike the game of hockey where the winner has the most points, or the card to the end of the finish line first wins. When it comes into objective and opinions, it's almost a religious holy war, the way I've seen some of the boards flare up on which one is better.
Well, there's never been a work of art that has pleased every single person.
Correct. Yes.
So there's that out there. But, you mentioned having personality, but still reflecting the team. And guys like Belfour and Felix Potvin walked that line, I think, perfectly. And even Curtis Joseph, they had their look, but when they went from team to team, it changed to reflect that team's colors. Belfour went with the different colors. Cujo did the same thing, but Potvin took it a little bit further. When he was in LA, he had the little crowns on the side. When he was in Boston, there were the claws. So there's ways to still have your personality, but be the team.
Yeah, and the masks that you had mentioned were works that Greg had done. And it was Felix had a very feline themed concept on his piece that fit his character of Felix the cat. Eddie being turned into the eagle while he was playing for the Hawks. But those things fortunately really hooked with those two guys.
And Curtis Joseph with his Cujo. When I think of Curtis Joseph, I think of his original blues mask with the trumpets. But that's not what he's known for. But that's immediately what I think of, being a Blackhawks and Eddie Belfour fan and hating Cujo of those early 90s Blues teams for ending the Hawks season so many times.
We've all got things that twig our memory that way forward.
And
the world, as you alluded to earlier, has changed a whole lot since, where I'm not sure, and this is now coming from a guy who's not entrenched in hockey. So bear this in mind for what it's worth. But I haven't seen any of the goalies and their mask imagery and their personas that stay consistent for more than 3 games, it seems like. They're always in flux. And I'm hoping that there's going to be something iconic and notable from this era 20 years from now that people will still be talking about. And I'm afraid because they flop and change and make so many adjustments, there really aren't any standouts anymore as far as the look goes.
Yeah, when you say that, people will say, well, Henrik Lundqvist always had, the crown. But like you said, it would change every 3 games. I would say the closest to having a consistent style was the recently retired Corey Crawford. I mean, he would come and have the same design for 2-3 seasons.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the same over the course of his career. It did change, but he was the closest to having a consistent design, where it didn't change every few games.
Yeah, and I truly understand how the thought process goes for the folks nowadays, because it was the same process that I went through myself 30 years ago when I was involved with it, that I wasn't thinking, wow, this mask will really stand up 30 years from now.
Right.
I was just so concerned about getting to tomorrow and getting this done and out. And certainly I had my parameters and design and thoughts that went into it, but I wasn't thinking long game for it. It was doing something cool right now.
Yep.
Was exceptionally fortunate that the cool that was right now, there's many days I wake up pinching myself that, not being a hockey guy, I was really, really fortunate that I had that many target hits.
Yep.
For the masks of the guys that I've worked with over the years, that more often than not, what I've got, I think I counted them up to, the thought of doing a retrospective painting on a bunch of them, but it was between 15 and 20 individual images that I could draw from. And there's probably at least a strong dozen in there that seem to end up still this many years after in a lot of those opinion polls that pop up and around. So that and $1.50 still gets you a coffee, but it's still really flattering as heck to be remembered this many years after I'd stepped away from it, of having a memorable image, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think probably one of your most underrated designs was Vanbiesbrouck's Team USA mask, where from afar, it's the American flag, but when you look at it close, it's all the bees making the flag. And I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, whoa, that's cool. I wish you would have gotten more playing time so we could have seen it during that Olympic go. That was a really cool mask.
Oh, no, thank you for saying so. That was one of the ones while it was going together that I couldn't stop laughing and giggling to myself while it was being created, because it was such a, it came together in such a fun way.
Yeah.
And as you say, from a distance, it was the Stars and Stripes.
Yep.
There were little things buried in there around that, like in the red stripe portion of the flag on the left side of the mask. John at the time had a red BMW convertible. So if you get that shot or the angle, you can see in the red stripe, there is a red bee driving a red BMW convertible mixed into that stripe. And there's a few other little gems buried in there, but it's, it probably had the most fun with that than most of the other ones.
So, this is a good segue, because you mentioned, not doing the masks anymore. What made you stop building the masks, at that, what made you stop?
That becomes a whole rabbit apartment, not just a rabbit hole. There was so much of it. It was 15 years that I was involved in the manufacturing of them.
Yep.
And for that period, 98% of it was a one-guy show.
And like you said before, that means your customer service, you're the ordering department, the shipping department, you're everything.
Yeah, creative, design, build, cut. So it was anything that you saw that was part of that process was on my desk. Not looking for any sympathy awards for it, but there was no such thing as only an 80-hour week. It was every day for 15 years. It went on.
Yeah.
So it was I don't want to say exhausting, but it took it. I had hair when I started. So it was a heck of a hill to climb, and there was help along the way. I don't want to think that it was all me, but
Yeah.
the day-to-day grind and the going to see the players, and it was everything that had to get done. A lot of good times intermixed with that. It wasn't all toiling in a coal mine somewhere, but it was just that much work.
A lot of work.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that makes sense. You know, at some point you got to step back and say, you know, from a lifestyle standpoint, where's the fun? You know, where's my downtime? Because if you're taking time off, orders aren't getting fulfilled. So that makes sense, you know, which leads the question to, over the years, I'm sure somebody came to you and said, for X number of dollars, we want to buy your design. Did that happen? And if so, why towards the end did you not consider that, or did you choose not to?
And that, as you segued nicely into one of the other reasons, it was around that era when the big corporations were coming in and steamrolling and gathering up all the boutique shops in pads and gloves and masks. And it was turning a whole bunch, just going to the carnival, I guess, and you trade 6 small prizes in for a medium-sized prize, and then 5 mediums for a large, and bigger fish kept eating bigger fish. Right, I guess mid stages, because I'm just trying to think of the era, which pieces were out and done. But at the time, one of the major players had a few of their, probably choose my words a bit more carefully here because I'm a little off the cuff sometimes, but had a few of their suits come in and visit me at the shop. And they had a really great offer for me to become part of their or underneath their umbrella. And to paraphrase the conversation, it went that we really, really like what you're doing. If you give it to us, we'll make sure you have a job. Which the look on your face was probably what the look on my face was.
Yeah, I'll have a job if I don't sell to you either.
And that was my rationale. And it was an odd time. So I think it would have been my privilege to give all my stuff to be a part of that big machine. But it had the writing on the wall that would have been absorbed up and then spat out within a year's time when I became redundant in the process. And truthfully, it was mine.
Right.
I birthed it. I sketched out the logo. I came up with the name for it. I didn't go to the idea store or the mask shop and hit the ground running. So I can understand how it's tough by putting one of your kids up for adoption.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And it was that kind of a feeling. So there was no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow at that era. I think maybe 10 years later, there was a lot of buyouts and corporate takeovers and stuff that were kind of cool. But at the time of it, it was just a mounting of time. And again, I got married midway through the Armadilla process. And quite often my wife was making trips back and forth from her work or our house, bringing food up to me at all hours of the day and night to keep me going. And so you sit back and look at it now and go, wow, that's a heck of a load even for my wife to put up with. But it then turned around, like the insurance costs were getting really squirrely. And you were then fighting the big corporations that went beyond just delivering a mask and getting a paycheck or getting a sales or a receipt and a check for it. They would then give product away, pay endorsements to players. It went from mom and pop shop to big business. And that was just the stage of the industry that it was in. It happens everywhere.
Yep.
I just happened to be in the early stages of it where people were trying to run over me by paying goalies to wear stuff and endorsing teams and spiffs and promotions and all the other ways that they would lure people over to their product one way or the other. And it wasn't just masks, it's skates and sticks.
Everything.
It's just, and it's in every industry, not just hockey.
Yep.
So that became, the frustration there became to mount a little bit. And it then, I guess a few years before that, I was approached by one of Canada's better known racers. He happened to be one of the earliest contact I had when I went to a driving school in our part of the world. He was involved with that school as well as a student and an instructor, and went on to worldwide acclaim. He knew of my dad being in the both of them entrenched in the auto sports.
Yep.
And we crossed paths at a social event, and he a big Toronto Maple Leaf fan as well. So he was really aware of the hockey industry. And the idea came up, would you be able to help me with painting my helmet? Which again, I said yes to. It's like a t-shirt for that, I think.
Yes, I said yes.
I said yes. And so I did his helmet, and which returned into multiple helmets for him. But then as his career moved up and spread into more high profile series, he told two friends, they told two friends, and that whole grassroots marketing thing took over, which then got me into painting helmets for drivers in the NASCAR industry. So you can imagine now 600 to 800 miles away from the center of that sport, I'm now dealing with a great percentage of drivers for the Daytona 500 and the rest of the series. So at the same, there was auto helmets being painted, goalie masks being built and painted, and I can see my hands moving here in the upper part of the screen, but the scale started to tip.
Yep.
And there was a viable alternative that I could still maintain my shop, still do the artwork that I love to do.
Yep.
And have a graceful way to step away from the manufacturing, which was becoming more and more of a challenge as each day went along, or it became less and less fun.
Yep.
It sounds like a really wussy way to explain it, because not everything is fun, but man, there's got to be some proponent of that in there.
Yep.
And it was just time. Not everybody can answer when or why it's time, but there was a lot of things that, again, kept tipping those scales. And the success that I had in the early stages of inroads into NASCAR, I wasn't manufacturing anything. The driver X would have his helmet company send me up a bunch of helmets, and I would paint them and ship them back to the company for assembly. And I understood that process, being a manufacturer myself. I got how it worked.
Yep.
But the load was really off the manufacturing side of it and the development. And at the time that I stepped away from it, there was plans, and I've found the doodles as I was going through my garage or my storage in the attic over the last 6-7 months, to bring a mid-price part to market. Armadilla always was marketed as the upper end, as far as the no excuses version. But to come out with a one that was a bit more, again, technology and manufacturing and all the things that help get it that way, would bring out a more affordable version for more of a mass populous sale. And these things were starting to, I guess more than start, but they were in process. And again, just, I don't know whether it was one day the scale did a quick jump and made 2 or 3 steps all at once, but the decision was just made that we've been here. I really don't have anything to hang my head for. Never had anybody hurt in the product. It's been an exceptionally controversial product. For those who understood it, really reaped the benefits of the differences. Those who chose to measure it just on that it looks different and not take the time to go any further with it, we're probably very happy with the masks that they chose to wear. And again, everybody's got one likes blue, one likes red.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, the Armadilla mask was so around when I went to buy mine. It would have been in the running, that's for sure. Because for me, it really was about safety. And it was, I'm not gonna lie, I wanted it to look good too. And even an unpainted Armadilla shell it stands out. It's got a certain look to it that is, it's pretty cool, you know. But like you said, the one thing that makes the most sense is it was time. And whenever you talk to somebody who's retired from a job or a career or changed careers, and they just say it was the right time.
Right.
That makes sense. And that almost tells the whole story. It was time.
Yeah, and sure, we've all, even to this day, we've all got things that we want to do or things to prove, so to speak, and to carry on. But I'm quite happy looking back at the body of work I've done and the inroads as a non-hockey guy
Yeah.
has made within that industry. It's been a great adopted home anyway. So
yeah, you know, if you can say it's time and have no regrets, you know, there's nothing better than that. So I've taken up way more of your time than I anticipated. And typically I close out my podcast asking a list of 10 questions, but they're very hockey related. So I don't think they would really make sense here, but there is one of them I want to ask.
Okay.
And I ask all the goalies this: what is your favorite all-time mask? And it can be one you've painted, it can be one somebody else has done, but what's your favorite mask?
Yeah, I guess a fan. I'm a fan of the genre, the structure of the decor of them. Looking at my own body, it's hard to pick one.
It's like choosing your favorite child, right?
It is, yeah. Taking them in a chronological order, the Shark is. It stands alone, as you alluded to earlier. It has laid the groundwork for any open mouth concept of styling, regardless of the success that the team or the player or any of those bits had with it. It seemed to stand on its own as being its own entity, or it's almost its own life force. It then inspired the Panther, which I think, as far as commercial acceptance or visibility goes, you can't ignore the amount of impact that piece has made. John played exceptionally well with it, and the team did well, and it was when a lot of the right pieces all came together and hit at the right time. John was a really cool guy to work with, gave me a lot of latitude throughout the years of all the masks he did.
Yeah, because I mean, even his Philadelphia one, that was one of the first ones that had chrome on it, which was really cool. And even Hrudy's San Jose one, I think, had some chrome on there. But then when John was in Long Island, I was about to say New York, but that's where he started. But when he was with the Islanders, you know, he had, I was almost expecting exactly what you created for his New York one. I don't know why, but the big NY, to me, that was very reminiscent of Billy Smith's old mask, where it had the NY across the eyes. You know, so to me, it felt right. You know.
Yeah, and it's, again, when you get in the favorites, and a lot of you go down the list, and they all hit the notes for me, but little different reasons. John's Philly piece is, from an artistic standpoint, probably one of the most satisfying pieces, almost taking root of, and people have called that image a whole bunch of, came up with names for it. But the concept of it was taking John's B. The movie at the time was the movie The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, where he got stuck in this transporting machine and a little fly got in there with him, and the two, Jeff and the fly, ended up morphing together. And that was kind of the impetus behind the Philly logo getting transported with John's B.
Yeah,
it had
you could see the legs of the bee in the Flyer logo.
Yeah, there's that insect quality to the Flyer. It's unmistakably a Flyer logo, and it's unmistakably a bee butt. So it was really pleased with the way that one came together as a concept. Kelly's Hollywood was just as an image. Sitting over on the bench here beside me, a version of her on my drafting table, and it just, again, a phrase you used before, it looked right. The purple that was brought back in, That was kind of my homage or the throwback to the old Kings from years ago, because they were strictly white, black, and silver at the time. So it was, and that purple just gave it a bit of a standout glow, which was kind of cool. John's Olympic piece that you had mentioned, that did get to see the occasional play in an alumni game and some other stuff that he wore it in. But
well, he even had the NHLPA one, which was really cool at the same time.
Yeah, that again, a little different spin on it, mimicking the jerseys that the teams wore at the time. I've just really thankful to the guys that I had to work with that really cut me slack. I know John's Philly piece. I remember the phone call that I'm going to Philly, make me look cool. It was almost as short as that phone call was, and met he and his wife at the Toronto airport as they were passing through, and made the exchange there. And it's again, I'm really, really happy with the guys that I was able to associate with, both pro guys, and there was as much cool stuff for minor hockey and beer league guys as there have been for the pro stuff. And there's, looking back at some of the others, I know Greg and I were competitors back in the day, or alternate choices. But to know that he and I were the only ones who actually made and painted our own stuff. Mm-hmm. We're kind of in a really bit of an odd club that way. But just a lot of his stuff, standouts for me with stuff that he'd done. I really liked his Sean Burke's New Jersey mask. Yeah. The red and green devils. Again, it wasn't a devil, a lot of devil-esque shapes that went into making up the mask. And so he, I think, probably had a 10 or 15 year head start on me, but I think share a lot of design concept and feels that there's a bit of a mutual admiration going back, and as far as some of our artwork goes. There's just so many to, again, from my own body of work, but from some of the others doing it. There's some really cool stuff out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Don, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day. I think we probably could have talked for a few more hours if I let us go down the rabbit holes, and I wanted to, but I had to experience some good restraint here. But thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a real treat to sit here and talk one of my favorite art mediums, goalie masks.
Guys, Joe, I appreciate the interest in it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and again, I got to thank Matt from Vintage Goalie for helping connect us and telling you really need to talk to him. He's onto something here.
He's at the center of the universe for a lot of cool goalie stuff. I know he does some really slick work with his apparel lines. And, a tremendous designer in his own right for the stuff that he's done. It's some really awesome imagery. And it's great to have been able to connect with him during one of our trips through Ottawa, and just kind of developed a decent friendship from it since. So
that's awesome. Well, again, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be in touch, over social media and who knows what else.
Certainly look forward to it. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, and I will, when we disconnect here, I'll do some digging and see if I can get you that original Panthers look for it. So
that'd be amazing. I appreciate it. All I can say is, wow, what a conversation with Don. I can't thank him enough for being so gracious with his time and sharing his stories. He has had such an impact on goaltending, yet he never played the position. You can find Don online at donstraus.com and on Instagram at Don Straus Design. All one word, no spaces. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube simply by searching for Washed Up Goalie, and I'll pop up. Visit washedupgoalie.com for some great hockey-related content, my beer league hockey video highlights. There was even one this last week as I made a return to the ice for the first time since early October, and all podcast episodes. If you want some Washed Up Goalie or Tendy Talk apparel, be sure to click the shop link on my website to visit my threadless shop. I need to thank the band The Zambonis for allowing me to use their music on my podcasts. You can download their music on iTunes or listen wherever you stream music from. I'm working on lining up other goalies to talk to for future episodes. If you are a goalie or have connections to a goalie who I should talk to, shoot me an email at washedupgoalie39@gmail.com or send me a DM on social media like some have. Let's not forget, if you're a brand who wants to sponsor the show, be sure to reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk and work something out. And finally, if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, and comment on the podcast platform you're listening on. It's a quick action on your part that helps others find Tendy Talk. Until next time, keep your stick on the ice and your body square to the puck.